Welcome to Book 2 in the Horrors and Hoagies series, Tortured Souls. In this, we will cover chapters 9 through chapter 11. We encourage you to immerse yourself in the exciting events that unfold. From thrilling action scenes to heart-pumping moments of suspense, Tortured Souls is sure to keep you on the edge of your seat. We appreciate your support and hope that you continue to enjoy the journey we have in store for you. Chapter 11, Unholy Deliveries.
Siddiqui handed a heavy clipboard to Thomas, a tall Native American man, and his co-worker James, who was of Irish descent. They took turns examining the documents, comparing them to the corresponding papers on the makeshift desk at the New York Museum of History's receiving dock. James had poured himself a large cup of black coffee. As Siddiqui noticed the strong aroma, he also detected a hint of alcohol. After a brief absence, James returned with a second cup for Thomas, who gratefully accepted and drank it as if it were refreshing tap water. The organized chaos of the warehouse was a sight to behold. Boxes, bins, and canvassed artifacts from all corners of the world were stacked high, many still bearing their original shipping labels and symbols. Siddiqui couldn't help but smile as he took it all in, his imagination running wild with the possibilities. Historical artifacts and jewelry hung from various points, and he found himself mentally appraising their value and age. It was where he could see himself working for a long time. Lost in his daydreams, he suddenly noticed something intriguing on the dull concrete floor of the warehouse. The floor, which was otherwise plain and unremarkable, had thick bronze bands extending from a seal in the center of the room, resembling a dinner plate in size. Intrigued, he walked a few steps closer and knelt to touch the nearest metal band by the bay doors. Curiosity piqued, he couldn't help but ask,
"What is the story behind this fascinating decoration?"
Thomas and James briefly paused their work to glance up at him. Thomas explained,
Ley lines connect spiritual sites around the world. A nexus is a point where multiple lines cross. As for the museum, it is simply acknowledging the presence of this nexus, but it is not the focus of the exhibits.
Thomas shrugged.
In some cultures, it is a connection to the spirit world. Others claim it is a source of magical power. Such places were revered and maintained by the shamans of old cultures who, supposedly, used them to mystical ends.
Siddiqui expressed his excitement, remarking on the curator's dedication to studying cultures. Thomas acknowledged the surprise factor of the curator's actions before ending the conversation and returning to work. The men confirmed the shipment request as James grumbled while finding a dolly. Thomas then informed Siddiqui that they were ready to see the shipment, and Siddiqui signaled for Max to begin. Max hopped down from the truck's cab and slapped the cargo compartment's side as he guided Siddiqui toward the cargo admissions desk. Meanwhile, the trick doors swung open as Lukeman's workers, disguised as porters, began carefully unloading the valuable cargo. They were dressed in overalls and long-sleeved shirts to hide the gruesome brands. James, who had grabbed a worn-out dolly, whistled and tipped his cap.
It's not every day we get a shipment with its labor team. It is a refreshing change.
The desk received the container after being lifted from the concrete ramp. Thomas inspected it thoroughly after the thrall stepped back to give him space. Although it only took him a few seconds to examine the labels, Siddiqui was confident that Thomas wouldn't find labeling discrepancies. The forger of the documentation had done an excellent job, as it was convincing enough for Thomas to begin relaying information to James, who promptly prepared the collection receipt. Everything went smoothly until James noticed a discrepancy in the paperwork at the last minute.
Hold on, guys. There's no name for the sarcophagus here. Who's inside it anyway?
He looked at Max and Siddiqui, impatiently waiting for an answer. Siddiqui panicked because he hadn't even seen the sarcophagus. It was sealed in the crate the entire time in the city. Max let Siddiqui squirm before smoothly responding.
It's unusual. The gang in Cairo believes it's a priest of Anubis, but they never gave me their findings. We're only the shipping crew. You'll have to contact them for answers.
James shrugged and responded.
Okay, fine.
But he added that they couldn't reveal it without the answers. He turned to Thomas and said.
Go ahead and open it.
On the other hand, Max became tense at this unexpected turn of events. While Siddiqui silently prayed to the pharaoh, Max subtly reached for his concealed pistol. With a crowbar in his hand, Thomas effortlessly removed the lid and set it aside, letting out a whistle of amazement. Amongst the packing materials, a stunning gold and ebony artwork emerged, displaying all the symbols of a pharaoh's chief priest's final resting place, the crook and staff tightly held against the chest in the traditional ancient Egyptian manner. The visible lid showcased the intricately illustrated clothing and sandal-clad feet. However, the most striking feature was the unfamiliar obsidian face, resembling Anubis, the god of the dead, conductor of souls, and ruler of the necropolis, which only Max recognized. Examining the artifact, Thomas furrowed his brow in frustration.
I can understand why they're having difficulties. As far as I can see, there are no words on this thing.
He shrugged and gestured towards a long aisle beyond the door.
If you boys wouldn't mind, could you move this over there for us to examine later?
Siddiqui's head bobbed up and down with excitement like the two warehouse workers who were equally captivated by the grandeur of the sarcophagus. Max casually waved his hand, signaling the workers to close the crate and carry it down the aisle as instructed. Max quickly caught up with the workers, pausing to whisper mischievously in Siddiqui's ear.
Keep these people occupied for as long as possible while I go cause some trouble. Okay.
Siddiqui gulped nervously before diverting James and Thomas's attention, distracting them from the villains infiltrating the museum's warehouse. Siddiqui's curiosity about the fascinating displays allowed him to ask genuine questions like an enthusiastic child. Max attentively listened to his plump companion as he chatted away, ensuring their scheme worked. Max directed the thralls to quickly and quietly get to work at the end of the aisle. They placed the box on the floor, opened the casket, and moved the container lid aside. Each thrall retrieved a container of blood from their bulky attire, still moist from being stored in a box of ice. They opened the containers and poured their contents into sacred canopic jars hidden beneath the packing material in the sarcophagus crate. They opened the jars in unison and allowed the fresh vitae to mix with the desiccated remains. It caused the mixture to come to life after millennia of internment. Max glanced over his shoulder and observed the distraction was still working. The fool Siddiqui had somehow convinced the curator and staff to stay engaged. Max couldn't help but admire the hefty man's ability to keep everyone occupied. Although he knew he would have to eliminate Siddiqui eventually, it would be a shame to waste his talent. The Thulian organization could always benefit from having another individual skilled in diversion. As he shifted his gaze back to their task, he saw that the thralls had already used pocket knives to etch mysterious symbols onto their palms. Blood trickled from their hands and dripped into jars, mingling with the swirling magical concoction inside. The insatiable contents of the jars were already sapping the life force from the wretched souls of the donors. The consequences were unsettling. The thralls' teeth began to decay, their eyes clouded with cataracts, their skin turned ashen and thin, and their hair sprouted patches of white. Max allowed the process to continue for as long as he dared, which was only a few seconds, before quietly instructing them to seal the jars and place them back in the crate. The crate was quickly resealed and stray blood was wiped from the area. The thralls concluded the ritual by donning work gloves to cover their still bleeding hands. With a nod of his head, they departed as silently as ghosts. Without sparing a glance at Siddiqui, Max breezed past the dock entrance. The thralls, lacking the same enthusiasm they had when they arrived, reluctantly followed him and crawled into the back of the truck. Max slipped into the cab, started the engine, and drove away without a word. Meanwhile, the curator was engrossed in sharing the captivating stories behind the museum's exhibits with Siddiqui. However, his narration abruptly halted as he noticed the truck's sudden departure. James, Thomas, and Siddiqui turned their heads in time to witness the vehicle speeding away, leaving Siddiqui stranded. Dumbfounded, Siddiqui couldn't comprehend how his fellow loyal followers could abandon him. How was he supposed to make his way home, let alone report back to the pharaoh? Frustrated, he grumbled while rummaging through his pockets for enough money for a cab ride. A wave of embarrassment flushed his cheeks as he only found loose change. Noticing Siddiqui's concern, Thomas patted the overweight man on the shoulder and said,
Don't worry. I'll give you a ride wherever you need to go. My bike has a sidecar for Jerry because he's too lazy to figure out how to get around town on his own.
I'm right here, you thick-headed fool.
Jerry jokingly replied. Siddiqui found Jerry's response amusing and saw no offense intended. Thomas's straightforward manner seemed to rub off on his colleagues. After a deep breath, he responded,
I'm looking forward to feeling a cool breeze instead of listening to your hot air in my ear while we're on the bike, Jerry.
The smile on his face was genuine. These two were quite the characters. Thomas playfully punched Jerry on the arm before they waved goodbye and rode off. The curator shook his head before retreating to the museum proper. He carefully avoided the bronze bands and seal on the warehouse floor as he walked and muttered dejectedly about the mountain of paperwork that awaited him in his office. As Luqman reflected on the outcome of his subordinate's work from the night before, he couldn't help but think about the high standards he had set. He had spent hours overseeing every move, refusing to participate as it was beneath him. Unfortunately, this meant that he had sacrificed valuable sleep, staying up into the morning to ensure that everything was to his satisfaction. The third floor had been saved, if one could even call it that, for such a worthless endeavor. Luqman had transformed it into a makeshift ritual chamber, adorned with materials, costumes, and extravagant decorations, attempting to mimic the grandeur befitting a god. Silk tapestries covered the walls, hiding the mold that lurked beneath. Lavish rugs concealed the creaky floor, while tables adorned with precious stones and recovered golden trinkets took up space in the room. Plinths displaying busts of pharaohs and gods lined the walls, adding an air of auspiciousness. These were mere trinkets from the collection Luqman had taken from Siddiqui and his servile family, carefully chosen to aid him in his ascent. The only arrangement of true significance was the ritual circle at the center of the room. Marked with lodestones, sprinkled with rare spices, and illuminated by exotic candles, it held the key to the ritual's success. Standing proudly in the middle was an ancient stone inscribed with hieroglyphics detailing the instructions for the ritual. The overwhelming desire to commence the summoning ritual consumed him entirely. The excitement he felt made him feel giddy with anticipation. Every thought that occupied his mind revolved around his burning desire to attain the immense power the ritual promised. As time passed and his ascendance delayed, his agitation grew exponentially. He paced back and forth near the window, peering out onto the street in front of the building chosen as the ideal site for the ritual. It was situated perfectly, far enough away from the local ley line nexus to avoid any potential mystical repercussions, yet close enough for the blood-binding rituals performed by his followers to grant him direct control over the magic that awaited him. As he caught sight of the truck turning the corner in the distance and slowly approaching his building, he knew that his followers had returned. It was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment to begin preparations. With an air of authority, he observed the vehicle stop beneath him and examined each passenger as they entered his temporary sanctuary. Seeing his once youthful and vigorous thralls struggling to ascend the stairs to the third-floor landing filled him with immense satisfaction. The binding ritual had been executed flawlessly and now everything was in place for what was to come. Max discovered Claws hiding behind the stairs near the building entrance. The two Thulian agents allowed the thralls to go up the stairs to divert their master's attention, allowing him a private conversation. Max quietly communicated the details of the museum encounter to Claws in German, ensuring every detail was accurately conveyed. After receiving the report, Claws nodded and retreated to a nearby wall and telegraph machine. The telegraph machine resembled any outdated machine of its kind, consisting of a paddle, base, and a few diodes. The only modifications were the addition of a headset and a small transmitter, replacing the cable that would typically connect to local lines. The machine was a common tool used by Thule operatives in the field to send encoded messages to a paired device located in one of the organization's hidden information centers, regardless of the distance. Claus's role was to report the mission operative's actions to the secret supporters of the operation. As Max approached the ritual room, he found the thralls already dressed in dark robes resembling the priests of the City of the Dead. Their bodies were worn from their sacrifice to the mummy, causing them to sway and breathe heavily. Luqman, on the other hand, was adorned in a loincloth and a magnificent Anubis headdress that matched the sarcophagus at the museum. Max couldn't help but think that the set must have cost a fortune, but knowing Luqman's wealth, it wasn't surprising that he spared no expense. Max positioned himself on the third-floor landing beside his collection of gear. He had acquired ample weapons and explosives from Loth's U-boat, ensuring he was equipped for a prolonged battle. Leaning against a crate filled with 12 grenades, which was on top of a larger container holding 6 MP-40 machine guns and their ammunition, he was ready for anything. Additionally, he had an identical stash in the back of his truck for any unforeseen circumstances. Although he had never been a Boy Scout, he lived by their motto of always being prepared. Max found Luqman and his group engaged in the initial stages of a ritual. They were immersed in the customs and chants of their forefathers, reviving an ancient ceremony that had been dormant for centuries. The key to their success lay in Luqman's ritual stone, a valuable artifact obtained during his philanthropic endeavors in Cairo. The moment the opening ceremony concluded, Luqman could sense the energy of the ritual surging through the room. It was as if a gust of wind swept around the room, intensifying with each thrall placing their bloodied hands into the ritual circle. It ignited the ceremonial candles, engulfing them in a mesmerizing display of arcane magic. Stepping into the circle, Luqman placed his hands on the ritual stone. As he concentrated, he could feel the presence of the mummy enclosed within the sarcophagus, even though it was miles away. It was as if he had taken its place, experiencing the gradual restoration of its desiccated body through the mystical powers of the canopic magic. Through this connection, he could perceive the interior of its burial chamber, seeing, smelling, and feeling as if he were physically there. Before long, he would unleash this creature, harnessing its power and securing his eternal reign as pharaoh. Although the ritual stone was meant to resurrect the deceased Anubian priest through the dark powers of its god, Luqman had different intentions. The blood link between the canopic flesh and his obedient thralls was his secret weapon, his ultimate overthrow. It was a trick used by ancient necromancers to guarantee their reign over the returned dead and fueled the ritual. It was his ascendance's insurance, after all. No precaution would be too great in preparation for such an auspicious ascent to power. Luqman commenced reciting the mystical script that adorned the ritual stone. It was the true spectacle of the occasion. These words, spoken in the ancient tongue, served as a mortal plea for the attention of higher powers. Although the words themselves held no inherent power, they added a fitting spectacle to what was about to unfold. The intonations continued until Luqman gathered his inner strength to initiate the ritual. With a few hand movements over the stone, ethereal winds gently swept through the interior of the building, causing the silks to sway and the bejeweled tables to rattle. Soon, the thralls joined in the chanting, amplifying the power that filled the room. Lighter objects began to tumble. The fabric started to dance as if embraced by the growing swirl of magic. As the ritual progressed, the chanting gradually intensified in volume and fervor. The lodestones suspended themselves inches above the floor while the building trembled under the supernatural strain. Spices and dust tossed in the air and swirled in impossible directions in the ritual circle. Soon, a glowing yellow haze began to emit from them, leaving the room beyond the circle in an unnatural darkness. Only the inside of the circle was alight, with Luqman and his thralls the only visible figures. The thralls continued their feverish incantations as the energies in the room reached a crescendo. The hieroglyphics on the stone and their arcane inscribed hands glowed in a harsh yellow light. Max and Claus discovered an open window on the third floor and exited through the fire escape. As they stepped onto the landing, they gazed at the night sky. To their surprise, they saw twisted clouds swirling together, forming a vortex reminiscent of a tornado. The peculiar weather was accompanied by flashes of lightning, giving the impression that the sky was reaching down to snatch the building from the city. Reacting quickly, Max pulled out his reliable pistol and instinctively checked its ammunition by releasing the magazine. Satisfied with its readiness, he returned to his vantage point for a clear view of the ongoing ritual. Max was determined to make sure Lukeman wouldn't live to tell the tale if the ritual failed. Claus remained on the fire escape, silently observing the sky with concern and fascination. The building was engulfed in a gloomy haze as the clouds descended to street level. Along with them came eerie sounds of mournful cries that reverberated through the air. The swirling vortex hurled flakes of peeling paint and scattered debris in every direction, inside and outside the building. The entire place trembled under the relentless onslaught. As the storm intensified, windows shattered, and worn-out wooden structures groaned in protest against the battering force. The overstressed wood began to splinter while everything in the building creaked and strained under the unnatural tempest. Debris flew around, narrowly missing Max's head as a fragment shot through the remnants of the landing window and lodged itself into the wall beside Claus. With a wild scream, Lukeman threw his head back, merging his essence with that of the ancient mummy. As their energies intertwined, power coursed through him, lifting him off the ground. Through their connection, he could sense life slowly returning to the mummy as the grip of Undeath took hold. In his mind's eye, he witnessed the mummy twitch and writhe within its sarcophagus. Its fingers contorted and its back arched as his mystical energies infused its physical form. The ritual had succeeded, and the mummy would soon awaken once more.